signed in?
Yeah, it's just loading there now.
Very good.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining us here today. I hope you can hear and see myself and Tony perfectly, and we have the slides up on the screen there now. We've quite a number of people registered for this webinar. I think we have 26 joined at the moment, but I think we've 60 something registered, but we will keep to time anyway, and those can catch up. Just to let you all know, if you haven't met me before, my name is Katie Wheeler. I'm the Marketing and Events Manager at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. I know a majority of you probably are members of the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport, but for those of you who aren't, we're a professional body for people working within the transport, logistics and supply chain sector. We also run a learning network, CILT Mobility and Supply Chain SkillNet, which provides access to subsidised industry-led training for the transport, logistics and supply chain sector. We're joined today here by Tony Kelly of Collision Consulting, and Tony is going to give us a webinar today on practical collision investigation for transport professionals. Just to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. You should receive a recap after in your Teams website of the webinar. Please feel free to use the raise a hand function if you have questions, and the chat function also if you want to pop your questions in there. We will I'll allow Tony to begin now, and Tony will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the end. So feel free to pop your questions in throughout, but we will come back to them at the end. So just to let everyone know, please just make sure you are muted. There's no background noise, but we can also unmute you at the end if you use the raise a hand function. We prefer to ask a question rather than put it in the chat. So thank you so much for joining us here today, and I'm going to hand over. Oh, I have someone here with their hand raised already. Oh, sorry now. Sheila, is it? I don't know. Maybe Sheila, if you can pop whatever you'd like to say into the chat there, and I'm just going to go ahead and allow Tony to begin to keep us on time. So Tony, over to you.
Fantastic. Katie, thank you very much for that. Good afternoon, everyone, and you're all very welcome to this talk. Practical collision investigation for transport professionals. Before I go to the next slide, and before I introduce myself a bit further, just have a look at the photographs on the slide in front of you there. The photograph on the left-hand side is what we refer to skid marks. And very briefly, I'm going to just say to you that that one photograph alone, from that, we're able to tell the position of the car, the direction of travel, and the length of the skid marks allow us to say what speed the car was traveling at in that particular case, at the speed the car was traveling at the beginning of the skid marks. The photograph in the center, believe it or not, the person who was driving the car was standing to the left of the photographer when that photograph was taken, and I wouldn't show it unless there was nobody injured, or certainly seriously injured. But it'll show you what can happen, and luckily enough, people came out of that. There was nobody injured in that particular car. And the photograph on the right, I'll be discussing that later on, is a very bad accident that happened on the M1 several years ago, and I'll be referring to that later on. So, just in relation to myself, so that you know my background, I spent 30 years with the Guards, from 1985 to 2015, and then from 1991 to 2015, I was with a roads policing unit. It was known as the traffic department at the time in Dublin Castle. And of that time, I spent 13 years as a senior forensic collision investigator. So back in 2002, I did my original formal training in collision investigation. That's with De Montfort University in the UK. I went on, I did an engineering degree and did specialist training in relation to human factors in driving, advanced crush damage analysis, tachograph analysis, various courses like that that are required to be able to do a forensic investigation, which usually involves fatal or life-changing events. In my career within the Guards, I would have attended and investigated about 250 fatal or life-changing events. Life-changing incidents are ones where somebody might result in brain damage or has been paralyzed, but has some very serious injuries. And in addition to that, then I've been called as an expert witness both in criminal, civil, and coroner's courts. I retired in 2015, so I've spent the last coming up to 11 years now working privately as a forensic investigator and road safety advisor as well. So let's have a quick chat about traffic accidents. I have a lot to show you in the next half an hour, 40 minutes. And in some ways, when I was going over this earlier on this morning, in some ways, this is probably the most important slide I'm going to show you. The other slides are probably more interesting from the point of view you're looking at. I have some videos to show you as well. The reason I say this is important is because I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about this. In relation to the investigation of traffic accidents, to keep things simple for a moment, there's really three things that are going to cause an accident. It'll be the environment, the vehicle, or human factors, the driver. Quite often it's a combination of the three, but when it comes to investigating the accident, the approach is, well, given that we know it's likely to be one of these three or a combination, we start out by saying, well, what can we rule out? And from a forensic point of view, we'll have a look at the environment. So we look at the road, we look at the sight lines, and we see, well, would that have contributed to the accident? The vehicle is taken away and is examined, forensically examined, to check if there's any issue with brakes, steering and the likes. And if there's none, that's ruled out. And then the final thing then is that, well, if there's no environmental or vehicle issues, well, we're down to the driver and human factors. And when I say the driver, that could be the driver, or it could be, we'll say if a driver knocks down a pedestrian, the driver may not be at fault. It could be to do with the pedestrian suddenly darting out in front of a car. So that's the simplest approach, I would say, when it comes to dealing with traffic accidents. In the real world, when you're out there, and I would say as a transport manager would say, you're probably going to get, and you'll probably be well used to this, you'll get the odd phone call from one of your drivers to say, I've been involved in an accident. Now, the accidents from a guard perspective tend to be defined in three different ways. One is a minor or material damage accident. The second is personal injury, and the third is fatal accident. So I'll deal with this now in reverse. So the fatal accident, if there's a fatal accident, the scene is considered a crime scene. It'll be locked down, and a forensic collision investigator will attend the scene. Now, depending on where it is in the country, that could take from an hour or two for somebody to get there, or it could take several hours for somebody to get there. And people often ask, well, why does it take so long to investigate these accidents? In some cases, the forensic investigator could be on hands and knees looking for evidence on the road. Now, this isn't the time to go into the different types of evidence in too much detail, but to give you, say, one example, that if, for instance, a pedestrian is knocked down, quite often the pedestrian, the shoe of the pedestrian is slid across the road surface very, very quickly, and it creates a slight mark on the ground. Well, if the investigator can find that shoe mark and then knows where the pedestrian was thrown to and ended up being thrown with, say, a distance of whatever, 10, 15 meters, the collision investigator will be able to tell approximately what speed the car was traveling at that would have caused the pedestrian to be thrown that distance. So depending on the type of collision will depend on the amount of effort and on where the investigator would be looking for this information. I'm going to mention this now, and I'll be mentioning it later on as well, that the important thing about these collisions is that when we see a lot of damage to a vehicle, people get dragged into where the damage is, and they tend to record that amount. That's what they're taking in. But for somebody like myself, the collision that we see, that we do with crashed cars, that's post-impact rest position of the collision. The business end could easily be 100 meters away. So where this all began is usually further back. So whilst that information is important, we need to go back and see, well, let's see what happened before these cars, the truck and the car, came together. That's often the business end, and that's often the place that will explain what happened and the contributory factors. So fatal accidents, the guards will take over. They'll deal with that, not a problem. Personal injury accidents are slightly different insofar as the guards may come out, well, they will come out if it's a personal injury, and they'll take details. But, and I mean no disrespect to my former colleagues in any way, but the regular guards who go to the scene of a regular accident, so to speak, if it's not fatal, their training is quite limited. And I would say the training that we provide here would not be included in the training they get when it comes to dealing with personal injury traffic accidents. So some of the guards have great experience and their abilities are fantastic, but there's a lack of consistency, I would say, from around the country with regards to the information that they record. That can present as a problem when it comes to civil action cases, that the information you have may not be sufficient to protect one of your drivers or your company. The other issue with personal injury accidents is that quite often an accident will be deemed material damage, and it could be a week, a month, or even a year later before we discover it's a personal injury accident. And the guards have put that down to material damage, through no fault of them, but they have. So personal injury is a grey area as to, well, exactly how we define this. And then just moving on to the other one, then the minor or material damage accident. There was a time that if you were involved in a traffic accident, you could expect to ring the guards and they would probably be out to you within 15, 20 minutes, maybe half an hour to push. And you would explain that we've had an accident, and the guard would ensure that everybody had their driving license and insurance, exchange details, and that'd be the end of it. What I'm finding now in the paperwork that I get on my desk is that the guards, they're limited in what they're able to do nowadays. And it's quite often the case that when you ring the guards, they'll say, is somebody injured? If the answer is no, they will tell you, you'll have to just deal with that yourself. And by all means, come to the station to report it later on if you wish. So they're not necessarily going to attend. My advice to you is always ring the guards. The reason I say that is because I've been involved in several cases in court where there might be a dispute between two parties in relation to what happened, or certainly what happened after the event even. And to give you an example, one particular one that comes to mind is where there was a rear end collision, very minor collision, and the person in the front car that was rear-ended, her account was that afterwards she got sick on the road outside, that she couldn't stand up and that she was dizzy. And this is what she said in court. The account of the car that went into the back of her, he said, that didn't happen. We actually had a conversation. She never got out of the car, but we had a conversation. She seemed fine. So the judge was left with two opposing and conflicting accounts. The fact that the guard arrived and was able, even though this was considered a very minor incident, at least the guard was able to say what this lady was like, that she hadn't got sick, she didn't appear to be dazed or dizzy or anything like that. And his evidence kind of swung it for the judge. Because to be fair, if the judge is given two separate accounts, sometimes it's very hard to say, well, he says, she says. So in that case, if the guards can come out, I would recommend, there's no harm. Let's see, can we get the guards out? But I will say quite often, they'll say, no, if there's nobody injured, deal with it yourself. And of course, that potentially can expose one of your drivers to a claim later on for personal injury. And there's nobody with the information unless your driver knows what to do. So on that note, let me just move on to the next slide. I would expect you probably know this, but sure, why not just throw it in? Where does an injury, this is the legal sense of well, what do we need to do with a traffic accident? Where is an injury caused to a person or property, and I have that underlined. So it's not just if somebody's injured, if there's any damage to property. You must stop the vehicle and you must keep it at that place for a period which is reasonable. It doesn't say that you have to be there for 2 or 3 hours waiting for the guards to arrive. It just says for a period which is reasonable. That's not further defined. You have to give what's referred to as appropriate information. Appropriate information is simply your name and address, your vehicle registration number, and insurance details. And you have to give that to the person who's affected by this. So if it's a pedestrian or if it's another car, you have to share that information with them, and that driver of the other car has to share it with you as well. If there's nobody around, you must report the occurrence, and it says as soon as possible, to a member of An Garda Síochána. The general rule is you report it to the nearest station. If it was me, I would want to call into the nearest station to say it, but nowadays we're not sure whether the nearest station is a 24-hour station or not. Some of them aren't. So you would certainly ring the guards and take a note of that. So that's the kind of the basic principle of what happens. You have to stay there for a period that is reasonable, give appropriate information, name and address, vehicle registration and insurance details. And then if there's nobody around you, then you certainly have to give the information to the guards. I'm now going to just move into the safety at scenes. I've been at, as I mentioned earlier on, I've been at 250 fatal or life-changing events. I've been at probably several hundred other types of accidents in the course of my career with the guards as well. And whilst I'm at those accidents, there have been other accidents where people are looking different ways, they don't see people in front of them. So accident scenes can be very dangerous. I'm going to show you just a video, which I think will probably convince you of what you might know, but there's a particular reason why I want to show this to you. So if you look at your screen, we're at 150 meters and you'll see joggers jogging towards the camera. And if you could look at that and just for yourself decide, well, how many people can you see? Bearing in mind that they are only jogging, so the speed they're traveling at is significantly lower than what a car would be or a truck would be traveling at towards them. So if you can see these people jogging towards us, and you can see how many people. 50 meters away, and how many can we see? As we get closer, we're starting to see more people than we expected. And the object of this is really to show you that obviously the high-vis jackets stand out and you can see them at a further distance. And if you look, even the person furthest on the right who's wearing light clothes could not be seen until they were about 30 meters away. So we all know that wearing high-vis jackets is very important. And I dare say that's probably part of your procedures with your drivers. Once when you're out of the vehicle, be sure to have your high-vis jacket on. I want to show you this video as well, because sometimes we think having a high-vis jacket on is sufficient, and the answer to that is it's not. My apologies for the quality of this video. This is a test done by one of my colleagues down the country many years ago. But what I want you to do is, I'm going to play it, and just imagine we're on a dual carriageway, and just imagine you're driving the car, looking ahead, and we're coming into a lit up area. We're actually coming into a town. And bearing in mind what I said about the high-vis jacket. So you just look ahead as if you're driving this car. I've yet to meet somebody who said to me, oh, I can see a guard with a high-vis jacket standing in front of me just there. So nobody sees the guard. So let's have a look at this again. And the problem you have here is, one, the guard is wearing the high-vis jacket. The guard was aware of this test, so there's no danger involved, luckily enough. But what's actually happening is that the lights in the background are camouflaging the reflectivity of the jacket. So it's not just about, because the jacket was seen, it's about recognition. So it's all about, well, will somebody recognize me as opposed to just see me? Because they could see the jacket, but they recognize the jacket as being just something that's in the background because of the other lights that were there. And that's one of the issues we see. An example, I think, is if I were to ask you, look at the image, what do you see? I think most of you would say, well, I see a truck, probably a rigid truck as well. But in actual fact, you don't. What you see is a box, reflectorized square box, and you see reflectorized what appears to be parts of a rectangle with the corners reflectorized as well. And you're used to recognizing that to be a truck from your own experience. So this is to show you that it's about the recognition of it as opposed to just being able to see something. The other issue then with collisions is that when you have a bad enough accident where the emergency services are there, you can see across the carriageway here, you can see all the blue lights. Blue lights flashing like that causes problems in different ways. Firstly, the blue lights are great to warn people of an incident up ahead. Absolutely perfect. In relation to, we'll say, a dual carriageway like this, it causes problems on the other side of the carriageway because people get distracted, they slow down, and you end up having rear end collisions on the other side of the carriageway. If you're over in that in amongst the blue lights in themselves, there is an issue there as well. Because what happens is, and let me just show you this, if I can play this again. If you're driving within the blue light area, you can see all the blue lights flashing. You've been warned that there's an incident up ahead. Unfortunately, most people get distracted by the emergency services vehicles, the fire brigade, the ambulance, the Garda vehicles, and they look around to see, well, what's going on? Particularly if the doors are open in an ambulance, they want to see what's going on. It's just one of those things. It's perhaps a natural thing that people have. They want to see what's going on. It's very, very dangerous because whilst people are being put into an ambulance or being dealt with, if one of your drivers is out on the road trying to deal with fixing the truck or whatever, it's often the case that they're not seen. And I know of guards that have been killed in situations like that as well. So we should be careful not to get complacent that just because we have our high-vis jacket on, just because there's blue lights flashing, sometimes the blue lights themselves will distract people. Okay, in the time limit that I have, I'm going to have to jump through a few little items here. Photography. Given what I said here earlier on about the material damage, accidents, and the fact that the guards are unlikely to attend because they're busy, to be fair, my advice to you is that all accidents, whether they're material or otherwise, you should take photographs at all these accident scenes. I see it at least once or twice a week on my desk, where we're told initially that this is only a minor accident, everybody agreed what happened, and next of all, there's a personal injury claim put in afterwards. It's not necessarily a fraud from the point of view of a stage type of collision, and I'll be talking about them later, but it's potentially, it could be a fraud where somebody is exaggerating their injuries. Or to be fair, it could be a case of somebody genuinely wasn't injured at the time, but subsequently their injury came to light. Because it is true that at accident scenes, the adrenaline is going and people are under a bit of pressure. So it is possible that their injury only came to light later on. So in relation to taking photographs, one of the things you'll find that when the guards find out where this accident happened, they will quite often put pressure on you to move the vehicles. Where did the accident happen? Oh, well, exchange name and addresses, move the vehicles as quick as you can. And what we advise is that for the sake of another probably 2 to 3 minutes, if you take the right photographs, you will be gathering information that if there's trouble down the line, if there's an issue in relation to who said what and who's at fault, the photographs will assist with that. And for that reason, we would always recommend that when it comes to taking photographs, the first thing you need to photograph is anything that's likely to be moved. So that would be debris on the ground. If it's, we'll say, a child knocked off a bicycle, if we see the bicycle on the ground, or if it's medical paraphernalia, the location of that should be photographed if possible. In relation to the vehicles then, what you have in front of you here, this particular 2 photographs, this is quite often what we get, people send in, and they photograph the 2 vehicles coming together, and this is the post-impact. And quite often, that's all they send in. They think, well, that's the damage to the cars, I'll just send the photograph in, I'll just record the damage to the cars. The problem is, if you only record the damage to the cars and not record the scene as such, you're losing a lot of information, and you can't reposition the cars in relation to the scene. In this particularly the photograph on the right, it's impossible to position those vehicles in relation to the road and the environment around it. Yet that was the only photograph that we got. So for this reason, to create a very quick and easy way of taking photographs, The green arrows, we just have 4 photographs here. We'll say, well, look, from a clock face, take photographs 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, 360 degrees around the vehicle. If that's 2 vehicles involved in an incident, 360 degrees around both vehicles. And what we're looking to do is we're looking to record the damaged areas, the undamaged areas, and we want to position the vehicles relative to a fixed location. So a fixed location quite often could be road markings, it could be next to a lamppost, it could be taking a photograph so that you can see in the background garden gates, and the front of one of the vehicles might line up with the pillar of the garden gates. It allows somebody afterwards to reposition that vehicle on the road. So it's not just a close-up of the damage itself. Also, I'll just mention to you as well, is that I have 321 in the center of the clock here. The reason I have that is simply to remind me to say to you that when you are taking photographs, the procedure in taking photographs at accident scenes begins at the outside and you work in. So you step back, you take a photograph and you work into where the cars are. You never do it the other way around. The simple reason is, what I tell you, is that you don't want your driver, or you don't want yourself, to start taking photographs here and walking backwards in a live road environment. I have seen it where people have walked out in front of cyclists, for instance, and in front of cars. You don't want that. The safest approach is to start at the back and work in, and that way it allows you to see, more likely to see what's coming towards you. So let's just have a look at this slide here. This is a simulation of 2 cars coming together. I'm at a little bit of restricted to be able to show you some photographs because of GDPR and that kind of thing. So what I've done is I've shown you this, but I do have 1 or 2 later on I can show you. This is a simulation of 2 cars coming together. This is a typical type of photograph that we would get on our desk, which in fairness might very well show damage to the vehicles, but it doesn't tell us anything else about how they got there or even where they are as such. Compare that photograph to these 2 photographs. From these 2 photographs, which would only take an extra, if even 30 seconds, we're able to position the vehicles relative to one another. We're able to position the vehicles relative to the road itself. And we're also able to position the vehicles relative to the whole junction and the layout of the junction. So for instance, if we only had the first photograph, which I'll go back to now, if we only had the photograph on the left-hand side of the screen here, it is possible that the driver of the white car might say, I accept I drove beyond the stop line, but I actually stopped right next to the hard shoulder, the broken yellow line. Without additional photographs, we couldn't argue against that. It would be he says, she says. But at least by taking these additional photographs, that allows us to show that in actual fact, no, the car actually drove quite a distance beyond the broken yellow line, as you can see here. Another example we have here, this is a photograph that was provided to us involving an incident, but from this photograph, we were able to, there was a dispute, about where the collision occurred relative to a roundabout. One person said it occurred just off the roundabout and I pulled in straight away. Another person said, no, it happened on the roundabout and I pulled in straight away. This is one of the vehicles involved. We were able to go back to Google Earth. We found out where the photograph was taken from, and as a result of that, we were able to show that, in actual fact, relative to the roundabout, that's where this gentleman pulled in. Now, it's recorded to the side other things thereafter, but the fact that we had something within the image, all in this case by accident, but the fact that we had something in the image to fix the position of the car relative to the environment allowed us to do that, and very important for us. And then finally, then this other one, we have a photograph here where this vehicle had crashed into a wall, and there was a question mark over how the vehicle got into this position. The driver of the car said they crashed into the wall and they just bounced back out again, and the car ended up like that. But in actual fact, this photograph was able to show us that I know there's damage to the front of this vehicle, But if you look at this closely, you can see a fluid mark on the ground, and it's going around in an arc, and it comes around, and you can see additional fluid up here at the front of the vehicle. From that photograph alone, that allows us to say, well, in order for that to have occurred, the car has to have rotated, something similar to what you can see in the images there. So this is the advantage of taking photographs further back. Like I said earlier on, the business end, I suppose, is what we refer to them as. The other thing about taking photographs as well is that sometimes photographs reveal something in a car or a truck that needs further investigation. This is an example of that. There was a case where somebody had a ribbon hanging down from the internal rearview mirror, and the incident involved a car pulling out and hitting a motorcyclist. If you just look at this, and you'll see a motorbike coming to, this is a test that we did. You'll see a motorcycle coming up, and the motorcycle goes out of view and comes into view. I will play that one more time for you there. The fact that that ribbon is hanging down obstructs the view of the motorcycle for about 5.5 seconds. The slower the motorcycle is traveling, the longer it will be out of view for. And that was a contributory factor in the collision. And it was the photograph showing that ribbon hanging down that drew our attention to this. Here's another case where there was an issue over the position of a mobile phone. You'll often see mobile phones positioned on the windscreen of the car. Sometimes if it's low enough and if the phone is small enough, it's fine. A lot of the times it's not fine. And this is an example. If you look at the 3 photographs, you can see that there's a pedestrian, and this is a stage setup here, it's a test. You can see that there's a pedestrian on the right-hand side of the A pillar of the vehicle. The next photograph, the pedestrian is in the blind spot of the A pillar. And the next photograph, part of the pedestrian is in the blind spot of the mobile phone. This type of obstruction and issue with visibility doesn't occur on motorways or fast roads. It tends to occur in lower speed areas and in car parks. So let's just say we have somebody pushing a pram. If you can imagine, somebody pushing a pram could potentially be out of view because of the combination of the A pillar and the mobile phone. In this case, it's quite a large mobile phone. You can see just there. And then this is a photograph similar to one of the ones on the first PowerPoint, that slide that I showed you earlier on. And the reason I want to show you this is because this is a very bad accident on the M1 going back many years ago. It involves 3 cars. There's a lot of marks on the ground here that the guards would have marked up. There's gouge marks, tire marks, skid marks, various different types of marks. But the important thing about this, and the reason I wanted to show it to you, is that I did mention earlier on that people get dragged into looking at the damaged vehicles on the road. And the information here is very, very important. But the business end, where did this all begin? In this particular case, if you look at this photograph, if you can see my mouse and the cursor, on the right-hand side, that's the photograph we just saw previously. It's the vehicles up here. This is about 200 meters away. So what actually happened was there was a car traveling in lane 2, the overtaking lane of the northbound lane. The driver reached over to pick up a mobile phone from the footwell, lost control, and there were tire marks here that we were able to identify, showing that he lost control, applied too inappropriate steering for the speed he was traveling at, crossed the carriageway into the southbound lane. And that's what happened with that. Again, this is kind of maybe the extreme example of the fact that the business end is, in this case, is very far back. And then I'll just show you this, that this is a photograph of what you'll probably look and say, well, they're skid marks, and you'd be quite right, they are. But they tell an awful lot. And in relation to, say, this, in order to have skid marks, you have to put your foot on the brake and fully depress the brake. But before you do that, it takes about a second, what we call perception response time. It takes about a second for that time before you apply the brakes fully. So when we see tire marks like this, I know that about a second beforehand is when this has all begun. And it tells me then, from the skid marks, I can say what speed the vehicle was traveling at. So you can see a deviation to skid marks just at the top here. A lot of people, when I ask what this is, a lot of people understandably will say, well, surely that's the car steering to the left. Where you have skid marks like this, you lose steering. That's why ABS is so good, because you can steer with ABS. In this case, there's no ABS. So what these sudden deviation marks tell us is that there was a force coming from the right-hand side. So these marks alone tell us a lot about what's going on. And the reason I want to show you this is that because quite often photographs are taken, if they're taken correctly, the photographer doesn't need to analyze it or understand why he needs to take the photographs, because that's a different course altogether. But quite often these photographs can be used by somebody to interpret, and the courts will accept that as well. And very quickly, I'm just going to run through two more photographs for you, and that is a photograph here, starting on the top from left to right, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Just moving back at a junction can change your sight line. In this case, from 50 meters to 30 meters. That makes a huge difference when it comes to investigating an accident. And also, what it doesn't show it here, sometimes at an accident scene, you could have a vehicle obstructing the view of somebody pulling out from a side road. It's important, that's why it's important, I would say, for your drivers to take photographs, because if the vehicle moves, it's gone. And that's important to get the photograph earlier, because it could have contributed to a collision, albeit not involved directly. It may have contributed to affecting the sightline pulling out. And then finally, in relation to these photographs, just to show you that common sense isn't necessarily always out there, unfortunately. That, as you can see, there are two images here, both of the same advanced warning sign, showing the dangerous bends ahead and concealed entrance, and a utility pole was placed right in front of this. So you'd be surprised what you'd find on the roads around the country from time to time. Just to recap then on that, I did mention here that accident scenes we get dragged into the post-impact. There is pre-impact, impact, and post-impact. The business end is pre-impact. So yes, take the photographs of the vehicles 360 degrees if you can, but you want to take a photograph on the approach as well. I would say, as a general rule, as a quick guide, if you're in a 50k zone, go back at least 50 meters. 100k zone, go back at least 100 meters, and then walk in and take photographs. Obviously, be careful of traffic behind you and around, and take photographs of that. I'm going to now just speak about the other types of information that's out there that's available to us. I can see time is moving on. Tachographs, I'm sure you're aware of tachographs. There is speed data within the head itself. It's not on the driver's card. And then the other thing about that is that you have to be sure that your download key is configured correctly to download speed data. Not quite often, there's no legal requirement to be able to download speed data, but it is important that for an accident, that your download key is configured correctly. Also, nowadays, in the older type tachographs, you had at least 24 hours of driving was stored, and that was overwrite itself. Now you can have up to 168 hours, I think it is. It's a week's driving that's stored. And also with this, you've got Stoneridge and Siemens. There may very well be another one. Maybe Actia used to be there as well. But you have Stoneridge and Siemens. Both of them have 1 hertz data. The Siemens also has what's called 4 hertz data. So 1 hertz data is the speed every second. 4 hertz data is 4 speed each second. So every quarter second. And that is triggered in the event of a collision. It's additional information on the Siemens tachograph. Sat-navs are very useful as well. Occasionally, just a very quick example is that this is a collision that happened in the UK. A vehicle with a lady driving was involved in, she hit a deer. She had to stop as a result of hitting the deer. This was 5 o'clock in the morning. The driver of the truck said that the car stopped suddenly and he struck the back of her. He was being prosecuted for careless driving. But once the police looked at her sat-nav, they realized that she was actually stopped for 15-20 minutes. And then the truck came along and pushed it forward, and that he was then prosecuted for dangerous driving as opposed to just careless driving. So sat-navs have information in it. Also, some cyclists have information that in their watches. I've dealt with a case where information from the cyclist watch. We were able to use that to give an average speed and an approximate speed as well. There's data that can be downloaded from vehicles as well. More and more vehicles are coming online. I'd say probably 40 to 50% of vehicles on the road at the moment, that data is available. And if you look at the screen, you can see here, I've highlighted just in yellow. It gives the speed of the vehicle 5 seconds before impact. And you can see the speed is on the right hand side in the second line, it's in kilometers per hour, and it goes from 78 kilometers per hour, and then it goes down to 60 kilometers per hour. And underneath that, you can see brake switch, and that's the brake pedal, and you can see it's off, 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 and you can see on, on. So there is data there as well, very useful. People often talk about dash cams and cameras, and I could show you dash cams for the next hour or two if you wanted, but I actually felt that this might be more useful to show you. This is a Ring doorbell camera. I'm going to play something which has sound in it, so if in case the volume, you might want to adjust your volume. I'm not sure how this will come out for you, but you'll hear sound. When you're looking at this, you'll see a red box in here at the garden gate. A motorcycle goes through. And what's actually happening is a motorcycle goes past the Ring doorbell, and underneath here you can see the audio of the motorcycle going by. Out of view, the motorcycle strikes a truck that's turning to the right across the path with the motorcycle, and that's what you hear here with the audio sound. We know what distance that is, and now we have a time because of the audio, not because we see it, but the audio. And that, as a result of that, the average speed of the motorcycle was able to be calculated. Not a pleasant sound, but the motorcycle was injured. Well, if he was very badly injured, I wouldn't be showing this. So that's another method that people often forget, that the audio within dashcam can be helpful as well. Potential fraud, I'm going to go through these quite quickly with you. That there are a few instances where fraud, you have people reversing in car parks, and other people are watching out for this, and they're driving in such a way that they'll make sure there's a collision between them in the car park. That a new one has come out where in towns where somebody is reversing out of a spot in a town where they have to drive in, and we've discovered now that where they're reversing out, people are intentionally driving to hit them as well to put a claim in. Sometimes you have people reversing or roll back in the road, in the main road. You have people, a sudden stop for no apparent reason. This happens a lot on roundabouts, and I should say sometimes it's genuine, so they're not all people bogus kind of trying to commit fraud. Sometimes they are genuine, to be fair. One of the things that rings alarm bells is where there's a very minor accident. If the other person involved in the accident is looking to get away very quickly and says there's no need to call the guards, sure, it's only a minor tip, sure, there's nothing, what's the big deal? Quite often they will look for cash payment. Sometimes what will happen is that when there's a cash payment made, after that they'll put a claim in for injuries. What they're really looking to do is get away from there so there's nobody has recorded anything about what's going on. Sometimes they'll say that there was now 3 or 4 people in the car when there might have only been one. So we have to be careful of that. So my view is that when people are looking to get away from accident very quickly, I'd be getting quite concerned. This is my final video, I think, for you. Just have a look at this. So it does happen. And the other gentleman is there to record all this for the. So once that lady says that she has a camera, the 2 lads are on the bike and they're gone. It's like something you see in a comedy sketch on telly. Except it's not funny because it is happening out there. Okay, just to summarize, you must stop a vehicle in an accident. You have to stay there for a reasonable period of time. You give what's called appropriate information, name and address, registration details and insurance. I would say note the number and position of occupants in the vehicles as well. And even if it's a minor collision, I would still do that because we never know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, or next month. Witnesses, their names and addresses, or names and certainly mobile numbers should be taken. I would, regardless of the type of accident, I would recommend taking photographs. 360, that's all the way around. Take photographs, and also the approach. And remember I said about, as a general rule, 50k zone, at least 50 meters back, 100k zone, at least 100 meters back. There's often pressure to clear the road. So if you are recording something, record the movable items first of all. So for instance, if a tow truck arrives to tow one of the cars away, get that photograph in before it's pulled away. And within your own procedures, I would suggest your drivers should be aware of fraud, the potential for fraud. This will protect you in the long term, and will certainly protect the company and your insurance company as well, dare I say. I'm not going to show, there's one more there I'm not going to show. We're kind of running out of time here. Finally, what I'll say to you is that it's very hard for me, I'm sure you'll appreciate, in the space of 45 minutes to cover the topic. Here at Collision Consulting, we have a day's training, a one-day course that has been very successful for us over the last 10 or 12 years or so. It covers collision scene safety, examination principles, scene photography and measurement. We have a practical outdoor simulated. Now, we essentially put two vehicles together in an accident scene scenario, and we photograph and measure the position of the vehicles. We also have an awareness of additional sources of information, which is more detailed than what I've covered. And then we do case studies, finish the day with case studies as well. And then coming in the future, I'm going to say about 6 to 8 weeks time, we're in the process, nearly finished now. We have an online course called Collision Response that's really geared towards drivers. It's in total about 30 minutes and 3 seconds of 10 minutes each. It covers legal requirement of collision scenes, additional information such as noting the position of and occupants in other vehicles, safety awareness, again similar to what I've shown you, but in a bit more detail. Definitely how to photograph the scene properly and make useful photographs, awareness of potential fraud, and also we include then your own company procedures. We appreciate different companies have slightly different procedures, and within that we work with the company to include those procedures. That in fact is half hour online, and the drivers won't be taken off the road to do that, so they can use their own mobile phones to see that. Time is moving on. I see it's nearly coming up to 10 to 1. Thank you for your attention, and have we any questions?
Thanks very much, Tony. I see Jerry has his hand raised there. Jerry Meredith, do you have a question for us?
Yeah, thanks, Katie.
Hi, Jerry.
Tony, how are you?
Jerry, how are you? Long time no see. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's about 9 or 10 years now, I think.
That's right, yes.
Together. If I could just mention, Tony, first of all, I've been present at one of your courses, your one-day course across in the west of Ireland, and I have to say, I still remember a lot that we went through on the day. So it's a very, very good course.
Brilliant.
Highly recommended. Highly recommended to any transport company, because the company that we were involved with then, that we presented to on the day, have really benefited from it. They've actually, not only reduced their incidents with regards to collisions, but also they've reduced their claims by simply, adhering to what you actually gave on the day in the lecture. So I would definitely recommend it. Just two things, Tony, if I may. The ribbon hanging down the windscreen from the well, I suppose in the truck it'd be just hanging on the windscreen or from the top of the windscreen. Is there not a law clearly stating that you're not permitted to have anything that creates a blind spot in that C section of the windscreen? A being the top section, B being the section from the bottom from your dash out. Is there not a law there?
Okay, the legislation says that the windscreen should not be obstructed. It doesn't further define it other than saying that. And I think we've all become used to people having, say, mobile phones up or something hanging in that. And what tends to happen is they don't become an issue until they're an issue. In other words, they don't become an issue until something happens. Yeah. And perhaps, from a transport manager's point of view, it'd be no harm to maybe do a check and see, well, is there anything hanging from the rear view mirror, or is there anything going on? Do you remember, it doesn't happen as much now, but there was a time when we used to see a lot of flags across the windscreen of the trucks. Exactly, and all that. So it doesn't happen quite so much now. So the legislation says that the windscreen shouldn't be, there shouldn't be any obstruction. But just very quickly to deal with that, I spoke to one of the Garda vehicle examiners in relation to taxi drivers having their mobile phones, in some cases 2 mobile phones on the windscreen. And they don't have an issue with that. Whereas I would have an issue with it because I suppose I have an insight that others mightn't have because the nature of the type of work I do. And we do some testing as well, and we see this. Broadly speaking, they don't have an issue. But I suppose really better safe than sorry, no harm in checking, have a quick look, and it's one of the, perhaps included in your daily inspection list, that there's nothing obstructing the view from the driver. But thanks for your comments, Jerry, as well about the training. Appreciate that.
Not at all, not at all. It's something that we recommend all the time to transport companies, is not to have anything, not to allow your drivers to have anything in the windscreen that will cause, you know, a blind spot. There's enough blind spots around the truck without adding to them.
That's right.
And it's just something that we find. The other thing I wanted to ask, if I may, is you mentioned perception time earlier on.
Yeah.
The question I have really is around reaction time. Taking in perception time being, you know, any up to a second, there's 1.28 seconds.
Yeah.
Your reaction time, is your reaction time classed as something, you know, by the time you take your foot off the accelerator, or is it time off the accelerator onto the foot brake?
Okay, all right. It's all of the above plus more. Okay, and we refer to as perception response time, and it's quite often the rules of the road call it reaction time. Depending on the type of scenario, will dictate what the perception response time is. And what I mean by that is that research has shown us that if you're driving down the road and a child runs out from behind a vehicle up ahead, the average response time, perception response time, is 1.2 seconds. Now, there's a thing called standard deviation, so there's no exact figure. So it's 1.2 seconds average, but it could be a little bit less and it could be a little bit more. So if I were to say, well, as a ballpark figure, it's unlikely to be anything less than 1 second and could be up to 1.5. Now, if somebody's turning across your path, a car turns, the figure is slightly different. It depends on the circumstances of the incident itself. So there's no, maybe the best way to answer that is to say to you, there's no one figure, which is perception response time. But what's important to say for that is that if you're traveling at, and here's an easy way to figure out, if you ever want to know what you're traveling at in meters per second, simply divide your speed by 4. It's a little more than divided by 4. So say you're traveling at 100 kilometers per hour, divided by 4, it's a little more than 25 meters every single second. So if you're traveling 100 kilometers per hour, something happens in front of you, you will travel at least 1 second. You will travel at least just over 25 meters before your foot goes on the brake. And then obviously the faster you travel, the further you're going to, your braking distance will be. Does that answer, Jerry, does that answer the question for you?
Yeah, very clearly. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks, yeah.
Yeah, super, thanks.
Thanks, Tony. Does anyone else have any questions? You have about 5 minutes if you want to pop them in the chat or use the raise a hand function. Tony will do his best to answer, I'm sure, but we have on screen there as well how to get in touch with him if you are interested in any training as well. Tim, I have Tim there. Tim Daly, if you have a question for us.
Yeah, no, it's not a question, it's a comment. I know Tony for a long number of years and he's done quite a bit of work for our company, and we found that very beneficial, both for the supervisors and also by training supervisor was passed over to the drivers as well. So we have it. We have that ongoing with Tony, but I must say, just to recommend that it's a faultless course, and it's absolutely interesting for everyone, and everyone that goes on it, we get great feedback, 100% feedback from it, and it has saved us as well, and it has made our kind of investigation into any incidents we might have a lot more professional. So just to say that, and just to say thanks to Tony for this presentation, and also the courses he runs, you know.
Tim, thanks very much for that. The problem is I've already sent Jerry the bottle of wine for what he said. I've none left to send over to you.
That's okay. That's okay. I'll wait for the check.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Just from a personal driving perspective, it's very eye-opening, and things that you just don't really think about. You assume it's common knowledge, but some of the things common sense isn't that common, as they say.
It's look, it's not that common, you know, and we're all human, you know, we all make mistakes. It's the important thing that, one of the things about, say, the driving test is, the driving test shows how you can drive. It doesn't necessarily show how you do drive. And we all have to remind ourselves on day to day that you're only as good as your last drive, you know, so we all have good days and bad days, you know.
Yeah, and again, Tony, if I may just emphasize the fact that it was a point you made there, is for everybody to realize that reaction time of 25 meters, even at 60 kilometers an hour, 17 meters.
Yeah.
Before you actually get to your break.
Yeah,
you know,
no.
It's really to emphasize that distance you travel at such a short speed before you break.
Well, actually, and Tim coming online there reminded me as well that we'll say at 50 kilometers per hour is about 14 meters. So, you know, I suppose, to be fair, well, how do you relate that distance to something? A standard coach, and if it's okay to say, Tim, a standard bus air coach is about 14 meters long, 13 to 14 meters long. So even at 50 kilometers per hour, we will travel about the length of a standard coach before you put your foot on the brake. So this is the difficulty. We all forget that. It's easy to forget that, but that's the reality of it. Yeah.
Thanks, Tony.